Okay, so part of our probabilistic method, we were looking at list coloring in the previous class. So we started with the definition, and we looked at some example to see why the list chromatic number can be larger than the chromatic number. And now we look at one more example to say it can be quite large, right? So here is a simple observation. If let's say that the number n is an integer is 2k minus 1 choose k for some integer k, right? Then positive integer k, then the complete graph k and n is not k choosable. So what we are saying is that if n is large enough, then you can make the bipartite graph. So KNN is the complete bipartite graph on two n vertices. Okay, n vertices on this side, n vertices on that side. Every vertex on this side is connected to every vertex on the other side. So both sides are independent sets, but then all possible edges in between are there. Yes, that is the complete bipartite graph on two n vertices. Okay, K n n. Now this graph is not k choosable, right? So we even if you give k colors to each of the vertices, its list coloring number is much larger, right? So on the other hand, the bipartite graph k and n has chromatic number 2, right? Because we can just give all the vertices color 1, all the vertices here color 2 if I had the same 1 2 available to all the vertices. So now, why is this true? Okay, so what I do is that I take this complete graph on n comma n vertices, right, k and n, and for each vertex here, right, I will associate to this vertex one of the k element subsets of 2k minus 1, right, the set 1 to 2k minus 1, right. So I choose this vertex, give one of the 2k k element subsets of 2k minus 1, right. Then for the second vertex, again I give another k subset of 2k minus 1. Okay. So I do this for each of the n vertices here, right? So n is n is actually 2k minus 1 choose k. So I can give distinct list of colors, right? They could have intersection, but they are all distinct, right? Sets of colors to each of the vertices here, right? So every vertex get a different list of colors, basically a k element subset of 1 to 2k minus 1. Okay. Then on the right side, again, each of the vertex is given one of the 2k minus 1 choose k subsets of 1 to 2k minus 1, right? The same thing that I do on the right hand side also. Now the question is that, can you color this graph with this list assignment? So claim is that it is not possible, right? Why? Because suppose I give you some coloring of this graph, right? Now if if I give you any set of k minus 1 colors, okay, any set of k minus 1 colors, some vertex has none of these k minus 1 colors uh, in its list, right? Because I am using all possible k minus 1 element subsets of this. Now, since I have 2k minus 1 possible colors, right? One of the colors will be using the complement of this particular set, right? So for some vertex, right, this k minus 1 colors are not present there, right? So suppose I have a coloring of this graph, right, where I have used some colors, right? Now for any set of k minus 1 colors I am going to use here, right, I can find a right, set which is not using any of those colors in its list, right? So which means what? So which means that, like, if I am going to color one side here, for example, right, I have to use at least k colors to color the vertices of one independent set here, right? Because I have all these n vertices here, right? So if I look at some vertex here, whatever color is used here, there is some vertex which whose list does not contain that. I use another color, etc. If I use even k minus 1 colors, there is another vertex again which does not use any of these colors, so I have to use the kth color. So I need to use some k colors on this side, right? That is necessary. So if I use k colors on this side, then you see that there is some vertex here whose list precisely contains that k colors, okay? Because every possible k element subset of 1 to 2 k minus 1 appears here, right? So therefore, this vertex, there is some vertex whose list contains all the k colors that we are going to use here. So how do you color this vertex? Because if I want to use any of the colors, that vertex is adjacent to some vertex of with that color for every k. So therefore, I cannot have a k color. That is the proof. So think about this further. Maybe it's not very intuitively clear, but you should be able to work out the remaining details. So therefore, what I wanted to express is that the chromatic number and list chromatic number can be arbitrarily apart. So you might need to go much further than the chromatic number. Now, here is a result from Noga Allen. Okay, so Noga Allen is a very famous Israeli mathematician who has done a lot of work in graph theory. He has come up with several interesting tools and techniques, and he has, I don't know, maybe more than 500 papers now, and some of them are very groundbreaking results are there. Like, for example, one of the tools that we will learn if you take the course on analysis and applications of algebra, etc. in combinatorics, then one of the tools that we will learn is a version of Nullstellensatz, which is called combinatorial Nullstellensatz. Okay. So this is a tool, for example, introduced by Noga Allen. And similarly, he has many ground breaking results, which we can discuss sometime. But here is a nice result from him. So let G be any n cross n bipartite graph, right? Kn. Then chromatic number, the choice number of G is less than or equal to 2 times log n to the base 2. Okay? So even though we said that this can be as bad as this, right? He says that, okay, if I have twice log n, then we can color, no matter. If every list has at least twice the log n number of colors available, then I can always color. Okay, so how do you do this? So the proof is as follows. So you take the graph G, it has a bipartition into two sets, V0 and V1. So V0 disjoint union V1. And edges are basically the edges between them, right? So it could be any arbitrary bipartite graph, not necessarily complete. It doesn't matter. You can make it complete if you want, whatever it is. So now, what he does is define right, like, so the index set, let's say, vi v0 and v1, for example, vi is equal to n, that is given, right, for I 0 and 1, and the list size is greater than or equal to 2 times log n for every vertex. Now you take the union of all the available colors and form the list L, big list L, right? This is the universe of all the colors that is in the list that is given to you. So whatever list that you give, doesn't matter, you take the union and find the universe. Right? This is the set of all possible colors. Now, since the graph is bipartite, right? If you can partition the set L to, let's say, two sets L0 and L1, right? Disjoint sets L0 and L1, such that for every vertex, right, Li intersection Lv is non-empty, right? Right. For example, L0 intersection Lv is non-empty for the vertices here, and L1 intersection Lv is non-empty for vertices there. Then we can always color this graph, right? Because we have a partition into L0 and L1, right? And then you have colors available because one side is independent. I can give all the vertices the same color if you want, right? So therefore, that is okay. So now, if this property is true, right, the star, so I mark it by star. If this property is true, then I have a coloring, right? So now what I want to do is that the probability that this happens, right, or probability that this does not happen is strictly less than 1, which means that probability this happens is positive. If that happens, at least for one of the colorings, we should have this possibility, right? So there should be at least one of the partitions. This is possible. So we are going to basically find random partitions and show that with positive probability such a partition exists. So for each color, right, in the list, the union, right, in the universe, toss an unbiased coin, right? So like with same probability for head and tails. And if it happens to be heads, then include the color in the list L0. If it happens to be tails, include it in the set L1, right? So basically L1 is L minus L0. We basically create the list by doing this. Take the universe and I make L0 and L1, basically partitioning the universe into two set of colors by tossing coins. So basically finding a random subset of colors, right? And its complement. So basically I'm taking two of this complement, one and its complement. Now, what is the probability, right? Because this is a random experiment. Now I can talk about the probability of events. Probability that Li intersection Lv for any vertex v is the empty set, right? Probability that the intersection of the list of a vertex with Li is empty set. This is probability, right? That none of the colors in LV are chosen by the random experiment, right? So which is 2 raised to minus cardinality of L of V, right? Because with half probability it is not chosen, and for every color in L of V it should happen, right? It is not chosen, and that probability is 2 raised to minus cardinality of L of V, which is basically less than or equal to 2 raised to minus 2 log n to the base 2, because cardinality of L of V is at least twice log n to the base 2. That is given to you, right? So list size is at least this much. Now what is this? 2 raised to minus 2 log n, which is 1 by n square. But this is much less than 1 by 2n, right? 1 by n square is less than 1 by 2n because n is at least 2 and we are assuming that, right? Now, the number of pairs I am going to form, right? I comma v, right? Where I is 0 or 1, right? And v is either, v is in vi, right? V0 or v1. E is basically 2n, right? Basically 0 and any of the vi's, and 1 and any of the vi's, right? There are n vertices in one side, n vertices in the other side. So basically 0 comma this set and 1 comma that is at most 2n. So therefore by the union bound, right, the probability L0 disjoint union L1 does not satisfy star is basically strictly less than n, because for 1 it is this. The total number of such pairs I comma v is 2n, and therefore when I take union over all these 2n sets, it is by union bound I can say it is at most 2n times this probability, which is strictly less than 1 by 2n. So therefore it is 2n times something less than 1 by 2n, right? So therefore that is strictly less than 1, which means that the probability that it happens, right, this is strictly positive, which means that for some partition this should happen. But if this happens, then I have a coloring, right? Nice coloring, because I just color from the available color from L0 intersection LV for all the vertices here, and L1 intersection V for all the vertices here. And since the L0 and L1 are disjoint, the colors on this side and colors on this side are going to be disjoint, and that is it. So therefore I can find such a coloring. Okay. Now we look at, so this tells you the gives you an idea how to use probability to show certain kinds of colorings are possible, or certain kinds of combinatorial structures exist, to show that this is possible or something is not possible. Now this is like just using the union bound, nothing else, right? So just union bound, and from the probability theory it tells you that the beauty of union bound is that it does not depend whether on the events are independent or not, right? You don't have to care about anything, but it is a very very weak bound, right? So then maybe you have to use some more powerful tools. So some of the powerful tools we are going to see, and one is the expectation. Okay. So we look at random variables. So we have all the tools of probability theory we can use. For example, first moment, like which is expectation. Then you have second moments, variances. Then you can look at other finer tools. There are several techniques one can use. So we will learn one more technique after this expectation. We will also use something called uh, Lowas local lemma, okay, which is a very powerful tool, very very beautiful tool, and it has so many applications in graph theory in many different areas. We will see that, and then much more advanced tools we will look we keep for later. So for the time being, let us continue with our introduction to the tools from probability. So here we want to look at what is a random variable. So given a probability space omega comma p, a random variable is basically a function which takes omega to real numbers. So it's a real valued function over the set omega. Now an example can be like you have an integer chosen uniformly from the set 1 to n. Okay, so with same probability I choose some integer from 1 to n. Then y is the y denotes the number of prime divisors of the chosen number x. Okay. And z is basically 2 times x. Whatever x is, it is 2 times x. So all these three things, x, y, z, are all random variables. Okay. Basically because x is an integer chosen from 1 to n. They are real numbers, so therefore they can be the random variable itself, right? Then y is basically the number of prime divisors. It's again defined over omega, which is again happening to be a random variable. And then 2 times x is also a random variable, right? So these are examples of random variables. Now, probability of a random variable taking a particular value, probability of x is equal to s, is the probability of the event, right? That the inverse of x, right? X is a function, of course. Random variable is a function. So x inverse of s, right, basically is an event, because we said that it's a function from omega to r, right? So if x is taking the value s, which is a real number, x inverse of s is precisely the set of all omegas which are mapped to s, right? So x belongs to omega s, x of x is equal to s. So that is a subset of omega, therefore it is an event, right? So it is basically the probability of the event x inverse of s. So probability of x taking the value, the real number s is the probability of the event x inverse of s. X inverse of s is the event defined like this. Now, events are basically random variables taking values either 1 or 0, right? Because as we said, like, an event is basically a subset of omega, right? Now, the event itself, if you want to look at it as a random variable, we can say that it is basically a random variable which takes the value 1 whenever precisely that element is being chosen, right? So I can define to corresponding an event, like suppose I give you an event subset of omega, then I can define a corresponding random variable called the indicator random variable, which says that the indicator random variable xa is actually equal to 1 whenever x is an element of A, right? Otherwise, it is 0, right? It's a 0, 1 random variable. It takes the value exactly 1 when when the element x, right, is an element of A, right? So whenever it's part of the event, then that value of omega, that element of omega is mapped to 1. Otherwise, it is mapped to 0. So this is an indicator random variable, right? Which basically says that something happened or not, right? When you do a random experiment, if these are the outcomes which has come out, right? You take for each of them, right? If that is part of A, then the indicator random variable takes the value 1, right? If it is then not, then it takes the value 0. Now, the expectation of a random variable is a very important tool. Okay, so what is expectation? Like suppose you have you are playing dice, right? So you throw dice and then decides the dice to like say like how many points you get in a game, right? So if I toss a die, right, in for example like in games like Ludo or I don't know whatever other games, where you toss this and say that okay, if the outcome is 4, then I can make 4 moves ahead, which I can translate to saying that I am 4 points ahead of my opponent, maybe, right? So, so I make 4. So basically, turning out the outcome is 4 means that I get 4 points. If it is 1, I get 1 point. If it gets 6, I get 6 points, right? So every time I do this. Now, when in a game, I am probably going to do it many times. Then I can ask, what is the expected gain I get in each play, right? Each plane, how much I can expect to get, right? See, one game I might get only 1, right? Second game, second one move I might get only 1. Second move I might get 7. I mean 6. And third move I might get 3, right? So this way I can get different numbers. But what is the expected number I am going to make, right? Points I am going to make if I am going to do it for many number of times, right? On the average in one move, how many I can get, or in total, how many I can get. All this can be, tell you how much gain you are going to make in expected way, right? So expectation of a random variable. So this is just for one example. It could be for any arbitrary random variable, right? So expectation of x is basically the value, right? This takes times the probability of that happening, right? The probability of x is actually equal to si with the value itself, and then sum over all the possible values, right? So for the random variable, right? For example, in the case of tossing the coin, right? Every time I toss the coin, the number of spots, for example, on the roll of a dice is basically 1 to 6, 1 over 6. So with the probability 1 over 6, right? It is 1. Probability 1 over 6, it is 2. Probability 1 over 6, it is 6, right? So therefore, the expectation of, expected number of dots, right, on a toss is basically sum overall x equal to 1 to 6, x into 1 by 6, which is 3.5. You will never get 3.5, but what it says is that if you roll the dice for, let us say, 10,000 times, then, and you say that like, okay, every time you get a number, right, you are going to be given, let's say, that many rupees, right? So every time I get 6, I will get 6 rupees. If I get 3, I will get 3 rupees. Then if I do 10,000 times, then I will get 3.5 into 10,000, that many rupees. That is the expectation. Right? That is what it says, conveys. Right? So expectation of a random variable is precisely summation over all its values with the probability that the random variable takes that value. Right? And this can be written as summation over all x belongs to omega x of x into probability of x. Right? X of x is the value that the random variable takes, and probability of that happening. Now, a nice property of expectation is the linearity. Okay, so basically it works with several random variables. You might be defining several random variables. Then you can basically do operations with this random variables. For example, you can take a linear combination of random variables. So suppose you take a linear combination of random variables. Like for example, I take x1 to xn are random variables. I just multiply with real numbers. Let's say r1, I mean alpha 1 to alpha n, right? So alpha 1 x1, alpha 2 x2, etc., alpha k, alpha n xn, and take the sum, right? And this is also a random variable, right? Because you take random variables, multiply with real numbers, and take the sum. You get again another random variable. For this random variable, right? The expectation of this random variable. So I can actually write it this way. I can say that it is expectation of x, right? Where x is basically the random variable summation alpha I xi, right? So for this random variable, right, I equal to 1 to n, right? For this random variable x, the expectation is basically summation alpha I into expectation of xi. So instead of something else, basically you are saying that it satisfies the linearity condition, right? So basically you can take out the alphas, take the expectations, take the product, right? So alpha times expectation and take the sum over all this. So this is called the linearity of expectation. Okay, so this property is very, very useful. We are going to use this to prove some interesting results. Okay, so let us take some example now. Now you might remember a directed graph, right? So we have a graph, and where the edges have directions, right? Now, usually in directed graphs, you allow edges from A to B and also from B to A, right? Directed in both ways. But suppose instead of that, we take a simple graph, right, where you have only one edge between every pair of vertices or any pair of vertices. It is there or not, right? So if I take that one edge, it can be given a direction, right? It is either going from, so if UV is the edge, then I can mark it from either going from U to V or from V to U, one of these. I don't allow both, right? So this is called an orientation of the graph. So take a simple graph and then orient the edges in whichever way you want. So if you start with a complete graph and then I orient all its edges, then what I get is called a tournament. So the name tournament comes because if you have a kind of a tournament you organize between a number of players or teams, right? Then any two players might play against each other, right? So in a typical tournament, you have games between every two players, right? To decide who beats the other, to decide the point, right? A chess tournament, for example, right? Then further, then you might go to next levels, but you first have games between each pair of players. So so this can be represented by a graph, because if A and B are playing and A beats B, right? A wins. Then you can say A arrow to B, right? Which means that A beats B. Similarly, B beats C, then I can put a B to C arrow, right? And A beats C, I can put an A to C arrow. So you get tournaments like this. So a tournament is basically for us a complete graph where every edges are given some arbitrary orientation. Now take this directed graph, right? So for example, I have this graph. I have a directed graph, which is an oriented graph, and then when I have a complete graph, I have an orientation, right? These orientations are called tournaments. So these are all tournaments. Right? These are just oriented graphs, right? Because this is not complete graph. These are all different orientations of the same graph G. But since it is not complete, it is not a tournament, but it's an oriented graph. Here is a tournament. Right? So these are tournaments. Now, so I am interested in tournaments now. Okay. So I want to look at some properties of tournaments. So one of the typical questions that comes in case of graph theory is what is called Hamiltonian path. So if you remember, a path is basically a sequence of vertices and edges in between them, right? Right. So a sequence of vertices where alternate pairs of vertices, right, consecutive pairs of vertices, has edges in the correct direction, right? I mean, for a direct graph in the correct direction. Otherwise, there is an edge between them. So a Hamiltonian path is basically a directed graph, right, where all the vertices are present, right? So if there is n vertices, the path must contain all the n vertices, and it should have edges in the correct order, right? From first vertex in the path to second vertex into the third vertex, etc. So directed Hamiltonian path is in a directed graph is basically a directed path where all the vertices occur in the path. Now, a first observation before we go into the main result that we want to look is that every tournament Tn has a directed Hamiltonian path. Okay. No matter how you are going to give the directions, you start with a complete graph. No matter whichever way you are going to direct, you will always find a Hamiltonian path in that graph. Okay, a path containing all the vertices. For example, in this I can go from here to here 1 to 3, then 3 to 2, right? So this will give a path, right? 1, 3, 2, right? And in this tournament, for example, I want to find a Hamiltonian path. Can you find one? I go from 1 to 3, then 3 to 4, and 4 to 2, right? 1, 3, 4, 2. That is a directed Hamiltonian path, right? Similarly, you can find in all the other graphs. So find a directed Hamiltonian path in any arbitrary tournament. So can you show that every tournament contains a directed Hamiltonian path? Before you go into the next page, I want you to stop and think about this. Can you prove this? It's a very easy proof, but I still want to give you because the proof gives some, some kind of a nice argument, right? Something that we have seen earlier, but which can still be made more thorough. Okay, so here we are going to look at the proof. Proof is very simple. Let P be a directed path of maximum length in the tournament Tn. So Tn be any tournament, then P be a directed path of maximum. If the maximum length has all the n vertices, then we are done, right? We already proved that there is a directed path of length n, right? And length n minus 1, which is maximum length. Now, suppose some vertex is not part of this directed path, okay? Right? The maximum length directed path is P, and suppose some vertex is not there. Because if every vertex is there, we get a Hamiltonian path, right? If some vertex x is not there, then I look at this maximum path from, let's say, the starting vertex u1 to the ending vertex uk, right? So there is a directed path in the graph, u1 to u2, u2 to u3, u3 to etc. uk, right? So look at this maximum length path, and then because it is a tournament, the vertex x, right, has edges, right, connecting, right, uis and x, right? So there is all possible edges are there, right? Each edge is present here, but it could be arbitrary direction, right? It could be. Now one thing that you can immediately see is that the edge from x to u1, right, cannot be there, right? It should be from u1 to x, because the edge from x to u1 is there. I can start from x, the path, right, x to u1, continue along this, I get a larger path. So therefore that is not possible. Similarly, uk to x also cannot be there, because if uk to x is there, I go from u1 to uk, then from uk I take the path to the edge to x. So therefore this edge must be in this direction, and this edge must be from u1 to u1 to x. This is clear. Now, if this happens, then what I do is very simple, right? I start from u1. I know that direction is this way, right? I look at u2. Is the direction going up or down, right? Maybe it is up. I go further like this, because at the end I know that the direction is going from x to uk. At some point I must have that the direction is going down here, right? So look at the first time the direction changes from going up to going down, right? It must happen at some point. Let's say that it happens at the place ui to ui plus 1, right? So at ui the direction is going up, and at ui plus 1 it is coming down. So all I have to do is that I go from u1 to ui taking the path p, then I go from ui to x, then x to ui plus 1, right, using these two edges. Then ui plus 1 I continue all the way to uk. So I again get a longer path containing x. So therefore the maximum path must contain x for any vertex. So therefore it is a Hamiltonian path. Right? So therefore you get a Hamiltonian path in the graph. So this is a nice argument. It has nothing to do with our probabilistic argument, but just to give you a flavor of how to argue in case of tournaments and direct graphs. We just took this. Now, what we want to prove is something much more interesting. That there is some tournament, right, on n vertices, which contains at least a huge number, right, n factorial by 2 raised to n minus 1 Hamiltonian paths. See, if n is large, n factorial is very, very, very large. 2 raised to n minus 1 is much, much smaller, right? So n factorial by 2 raised to n minus 1 is extremely large number, right? So we are saying that there is some tournament where the number of Hamiltonian paths itself is, number of different Hamiltonian paths is very, very large. Now, how do you prove this? So can you prove this using the tools that we have learned? Okay? Think about this for a few minutes before you continue. So what we are going to do is the following. We start with the complete graph Kn, which is the undirected simple graph Kn, right? The complete graph on n matrices. Now, once I take this complete graph, what I want is a tournament, right? Now, how do you make a tournament from a complete graph? Now, since we are now experts of random experiments, we can use random experiment to create tournaments, right? What we do, I take the graph, take an edge, toss a coin. If it is heads, it is going from u to v, right? If it is tails, it goes from v to u, right? So if you have an order on the vertices, then you can easily define this, right, nicely, or you can just decide and then whatever is the direction first, right, u to v or v to u, and then decide which way you have to orient it by tossing a coin, right? So this is the random experiment. Uniformly and independently at random, give each edge an orientation, right, either from u to v or from v to u, and this results in a directed graph, right, where all the edges have orientation, and because it is a complete graph, we get a tournament, right? So we get a tournament by the random experiment. So this can be called a random tournament. So I got a random tournament by doing this. Now let me look at the properties of the random tournament, right? So so we label the vertices of the tournament Tn by V1 to Vn. Okay. Now for any permutation of 1 to n, right? So we have n factorial permutations of the set 1 to n. We have studied it before, right? So take any of the permutation, let's say sigma, right? Sigma is basically a permutation of n, and x sigma be the indicator random variable, right? So we are associating a random variable with the permutation, right? Such that x sigma takes the value 1 if the the permutation can be associated with a path in the graph, right? I mean, whether it is a directed path, we don't know, but we get a sequence of vertices, right? V sigma of 1, V sigma of 2, etc., sigma of n, right? Because sigma is a permutation of 1 to n. Sigma of 1 to sigma of n are well defined, right? So V sigma 1 to V sigma n is a set of the same set of vertices in a particular order. Now this order in the tournament, I check whether V sigma 1 to V sigma 2 there is an edge or not, right? In this order, in this direction, right? Similarly, V sigma 1 to sigma 2 to V sigma 3, etc. I look at all the n minus 1 edges and see whether the corresponding edge is in the proper direction, right? Of course, there is an edge, but it could be this way or that way, right? If all the edges are in the correct direction, then I will say X sigma is taking the value 1. Right? So in the random tournament, this particular path corresponds to a directed path. Then I will say X sigma is 1. Otherwise, it is 0 because it's an indicator random variable, right? So it's either 0 or 1. So what does this indicator random variable say? It basically shows the event that the corresponding path that we have defined is a directed Hamiltonian path, right? Because we have all the vertices here in this order. And if the corresponding path is a random variable, is a directed path, then it's a Hamiltonian path. And the indicator random variable basically tells you whether the path, arbitrary path that we choose, is a directed Hamiltonian path or not. Now, what is the probability of this indicator random variable taking the value 1, right? It's easy to see that it is 2 raised to 1 minus n because there is n minus 1 edges here, right? 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc. n minus 1 to n, right? So all the n minus 1 edges, all of them with probability half is in the correct direction, right? With probability half, right? So with probability exactly half, this can be in the correct direction. So the probability all of them are in the correct direction is 1 by 2 into 1 by 2 into etc. n minus 1 times, which is 2 raised to 1 minus n. Now, what is the expectation of X sigma, right? X sigma is a random variable. What is the expectation, right? Expectation of an indicator random variable is, so we know that the expectation is defined as, sum overall, x, x of x into probability of that x, small x, right? But we know that indicator random variable takes the values only 1 and 0, right? So whenever it is taking the value 1, that event happens, right? Whenever it takes the value 0, that event does not happen. So the probability and expectation are the same because, if it takes a value, it is actually 1, right? Otherwise it is 0. So with probability, whatever it is P, it takes the value 1, then the probability P into 1 is actually equal to P. So therefore, expectation of a indicator random variable is actually equal to probability of the indicator random variable taking the value 1. Now, what is that? Which we proved here, it's actually 1 by 2 raised to n minus 1, right? Now, by linearity of expectation, right, we learned that there is a linearity of expectation, right? If I have several random variables, I can basically add them together and then take the sum of the expectations to find the expectation of the sum, right? So, now I take the sum of the indicator random variables as my random variable, right? So the sum over all the permutations X sigma. Now what does X sigma do? X sigma basically says, right, like X sigma basically is an indicator random variable which takes the value if the path is a directed path, right? So if I look at all possible, permutations and check whether each of them is a path or not, it tells us whether each path, whether it is going to be a good path or not, right? Whenever it's a good path, I count by adding 1. Whenever it is a bad path, I don't add anything. It's basically I'm adding 0, right? So therefore, the sum of these random variables, X sigma over all the permutations, is a counting variable which counts the number of Hamiltonian paths in the random tournament, right? So X sigma is an indicator random variable which counts, right, either 0 or 1, depending on whether that path is a good path or not. So therefore, summation X sigma counts the total number of paths in the random tournament that we are considering. Now we are looking at the expected number of Hamiltonian paths, right? So expectation of this number is what we can get, right? because we cannot find precisely what this is because we don't know what is the tournament that we have, right? So we are now looking in the expectation. So expectation of this number of Hamiltonian paths is by linearity, it is the sum over all the expectations. Now, for each x sigma, its expectation is 2 raised to 1 minus n, right? Now, there are n factorial such permutations. For each permutation, you have the same expectation. So, by linearity of expectation, this expected number of Hamiltonian paths is 1 by 2 raised to n minus 1 plus this how many n factorial times. So, that is n factorial by 2 raised to n minus 1. Now, what we are saying is that the expected value is this, right? Now, again, one property of expectation is the pigeonhole principle of expectation is that if a random variable has expectation something, then it should take a value greater than or equal to that expected value. Because if all the values are less than, for all the values are less than this number, then we are multiplying it with some probability, right, which is less than 1 and adding, right? So the number will be always going to be less than. It's just like the average, right? So the pigeonhole principle of expectation says that if the expectation of a random variable is some value, then at least for some occurrence of that random variable, it should take the value greater than or equal to the expected value. So therefore, we know that so here is a restatement. A real valued random variable has expectation k. Then for some instance, the variable must take a value at least k. So therefore, the tournament, out of all the random tournaments that we are looking at least one of the tournaments should have at least this many Hamiltonian paths, because we are saying that you take all possible tournaments, the expected number of Hamiltonian paths is n factorial by 2 raised to n minus 1. So one of them must contain at least this many. Okay, so that is the proof. Okay, so that tells you how to use linearity of expectation. Okay, so now we look at one more example to a linearity of expectation. Here we look at a nice theorem. Let v1 to vn be vectors of unit length in Rn. Okay, so v1 to vn are unit vectors in Rn, right? So basically, length of vi is equal to length of vi is equal to 1 for every I. Then the theorem says that you can find lambda 1 to lambda n, which are basically values plus or minus 1, right? So you can choose lambda 1 to lambda n from plus or minus 1 such that lambda 1 v1 plus lambda 2 v2 plus etc lambda n vn, whose modulus is less than or equal to root n, right? Basically, you are taking vectors and taking the scaled up scaling of these vectors, right, with lambdas, and then adding these vectors, right? So you take then look at the norm of these vectors. So the norm is less than or equal to root n. Right? The length is less than or equal to root n, and you can also find lambdas again from plus or minus 1 such that lambda 1 v1 plus etc lambda n vn is greater than or equal to root n. Okay, so given any set of such vectors, we can do this. So can you try to come up with a proof on your own? Okay, so think about this before you go to see how we do the proof. Okay. So the proof is again coming up with a random experiment. So we choose lambdas uniformly and independently at random from plus or minus, because that is the two things that we can choose at random, right? One of these must be every lambda must be one of these values. So we toss a coin, right? Decide whether lambda 1 is plus 1 or minus 1. Again toss a coin, heads plus 1, tails minus 1, right? So you do this independently for every every lambdas, right? So now I define a random variable as follows. So random variable x is basically lambda 1 v1 plus lambda 2 v2 etc. Lambda n vn, the square of the length, right? So this is the random variable. Now you observe that x is basically summation overall I summation overall j lambda I lambda j vi dot vj, right? Because x is basically lambda 1 v1 lambda 2 v2 etc. lambda n vn square. So in the vectors you can write this as the product of vi vj, right? And sum overall I on j, right? So summation ij lambda I lambda j vi vj is basically this, right? Lambda 1 vn plus etc. lambda n vn square. Okay. Now this is the random variable x. So now what is the expectation of x? Expectation of x is by linearity. It is the sum of the expectations of vi vj because lambda I lambda j, because vi vj's the product is you can take the dot product that you can take outside. Lambdas are the random variables, so you can put it inside. This is a scalar, right? Vi dot bj, and you look at the expectation of this. Now when I not equal to j, we can see that expectation of lambda I lambda j is expectation of lambda I into expectation of lambda j, right? Because they are independent. We chose them independent, right? They are because they are yeah. So they are independent. So the expectation of the product is the product of the expectation. But that is equal to 0, right? Because why is that 0? Expectation of lambda I into expectation of lambda j, because expectation of lambda I is with probability half it takes the value 1, and expected with probability half it takes the value minus 1, right? So expectation of each of these is 0. So in the product the expectation is 0. But when I is equal to j, right, we get instead of lambda I lambda j, I get lambda I square. But for this the expectation is 1, right? Because it always takes the value 1, whether it is minus 1, right, or 1, you will always get 1. So the expected value is going to be always 1, right? So lambda I square is always going to be 1. So here it is actually 1. So whenever I equal to j, expectation of lambda I square is 1, otherwise it is 0. So then we can reduce this, right? So what is expectation of x? It is summation I equal to 1 to n vi dot vi, right? Because it is either 1 or otherwise it is 0. And when it is I is equal to j, this is equal to 1 to n, yeah, right? So vi dot vi, because I equal to j case is the only one surviving, all other cases are going to 0, right? So this is always 1, right? Because it's a unit vectors, and therefore it is actually equal to n. So expectation of x is n, right? What is expectation of x? Expectation of x is basically the lambda 1 v1 etc. lambda n vn square. The expected value of this is equal to n. So therefore immediately we know that when you take the square root of this, right, it is going to be root n, right? And therefore if expectation of this is root n, for some it will be less than or equal to, and some it will be greater than or equal to. So that is the result, right? So you will get some choice of lambdas. So for both of these will follow immediately directly from that, because for some random tournament this should happen less than or equal to root n. In some it should be greater than or equal to root n. So we get the result. Okay. Now we look at something else. Maybe before this we will continue in the next class. Okay.